Thank you, Maitri. Can you hear me fine? Is it okay? The voice quality? I'm
Very
not
good.
I'm not
Good.
muted, in other words.
No, no,
No,
no.
you're not
We
muted.
hear you.
Okay, good, good. Well, thank you very much, Maitri and Mark, for reminding me of that 20 years ago, and also for inviting me here to be with you. As many of you know, I was actually supposed to be there live somewhere around this time of year, but COVID-19 intervened and that never came to fruition. But I'll introduce a little bit about myself, but I'd first like to do a reading and sort of set the tone for what we're going to talk about today. Maitri gave me a open slate to talk about pretty much anything, but I was reading the topic of the day, and I think I'm going to stay traditional and speak to the topic of the day because I find it a very important topic. And that's in this case, it was how to pray. In other words, what's the best prayer and how to do that. And let me start with a reading. This is a prayer for devotion. O Father, let me hold my heart in my folded hands to saturate my prayers with thy love. Give me the simple, sincere devotion of a child toward thee. Teach me to realize thy nearness behind the voice of my prayer. Teach me to realize thy breath in my own breathing. Teach me to feel thee in my emotion. Teach me to know that thy wisdom is my understanding. Teach me to feel thine all-pervading life in my life. Flood my senses with thy light. That's such an important prayer in the sense that what Master's speaking about is devotion. And I wanted to speak about devotion a number of reasons. One is, as you know, I've been introduced as I serve in India, but right now I'm not in India. I'm in America because of the virus situation, but normally I would be staying in India and I would be resident there most of the year. I come back and forth quite a bit, but nevertheless, mostly there. But now, being in America, you could say I'm still serving because everything, just like in America, just like probably in the world at large, everything's gone online. And since it's online, I can serve fairly well, just as well whether I'm in Pune, where I stay in India, or whether I'm here at Ananda Village. Although my hours are topsy-turvy, and so I get up early, and sometimes it's late in the night, but to be able to catch everybody on the other side of the world. But this topic I'd like to address about devotion because it's something that we, in our terms of our online work, which we do in India, and you're perfectly just like, I know Kirti here is today joining us from India. Well, you could actually join us on the India side too, is it in reverse. Just go to anandaindiaonline.org and you can see what's available there. But we've been talking about the importance in some of the seminars and workshops that I've been doing about this topic of devotion. And I'd like to go into it a little bit. And one of the, because I'm an American, obviously, here in this audience, you know that. But when I'm in India, it's obvious also I'm not Indian. And I'm not from India, and I'm from somewhere. So people notice, oh, I'm from America. And I say, yes, I'm from America. And although if people know me, they don't ask this question. But when people meet me soon after, perhaps first, second, third time, soon into a conversation, they'll offer me, oh, what do you notice is how do you like India? And I say, I like India very much, thank you. And he said, then they want to know the differences. Well, what's the difference between India and what's in America? And of course, I get that question in America too. And I try to keep it simple. And I say the things I like about both countries. And, I'm very diplomatic. Every country's got beautiful things to it. And I kind of leave it at that. But because you know how life is, it's duality the world over. But there are many good things in both sides. And one of the things I always say that I really, and it's truly do appreciate about India is that God is included in one's everyday life much more openly than it is in America. In other words, when I give a lecture in India, with the being appropriate, of course, to the situation, because I can't do it in every situation, but I can freely bring God into the conversation. Whereas in America, there's a certain hesitancy. You know, you might offend somebody, or people makes speaking about God openly makes people uncomfortable. Even I'm speaking about meditation, Kriya Yoga, these sorts of things. Yes, tell me about Kriya, but I don't want to hear about God. And no, I'm probably exaggerating somewhat, but I think you understand. And whereas in India, I can speak about God very, very openly about in most any situation, and even on the street and talking to the shopkeepers. There's no hesitancy there because God's part of everything. And I so much appreciate that. It's just like this is what makes me feel at home when I go back to India. God willing, not too long from now, but who knows, but until this virus is over. But that's a beautiful thing about India. Now, I think actually if you compared India and America, India has, you know, both are supposedly secular countries. India's government is supposedly secular, although it's, you know, maybe not always as to the degree it should in certain situations. But in America, we have, in order not to offend everybody and to include everybody, we have taken God out of our conversation. So you don't talk about God. Whereas in India, they've taken the opposite approach. In other words, they talk about God in everything, and you know, in a lot of ways, and so it's inclusive. So consequently, except for Christmas, we really don't honor the great saints. Whereas there, you'll have Christmas, you'll have John Mashtami, which is celebrating. You know, Krishna, you'll celebrate Ram, you'll celebrate Guru Nanak, you'll celebrate the Muslim faith, you'll celebrate the Buddhist faith. All of them get their place. So instead of eliminating them all, they took the opposite and just included them all. And, you know, hopefully to get the same spread of not being sectarian or discriminatory. But in all of them, whether you talk about them or don't talk about them, the essence and the necessity is for truly the practice of religion, and to make it more than simply outward lip service, there's this necessity of bringing devotion, that feeling, that deep feeling of the heart. Now, a very common practice in India is to go to temples, to go on pilgrimage, to go see great saints, and to gather blessings. And I think we could do that too in America, but we do it less, but we do a little bit of that. But to gather blessings, really, we can't leave it at that because it's a one-sided affair. Well, I'll get blessings, and if I have a big basket and I fill my basket with blessings, I'll be better off. Well, yes, but then you put those blessings on the shelf, and then it doesn't do much good if it's sitting on the shelf. We have to actually put those blessings into practice. And I think those of you, I heard you had a Kriya initiation, yes, last night perhaps, and you've been given great blessing. And all of us who are Kriya Bonds already have been given a great blessing. Now the question is, do you put them in the basket and then put them in a fancy urn on the mantle? No, you can't do that. You have to use those blessings and live up to those blessings. And through your individual effort, you'll make those blessings come alive through the practice of your Kriya Yoga. But this is somewhat, I can say that in India pretty openly, but in America sometimes it's a little bit, the conversation amongst devotees is fine, but publicly it's a little bit more awkward that way because there's this consciousness of self-effort, and absolutely self-effort is needed. And we have to bring that self-effort also to prayer as well. We have to put that effort in our effort to God as what Master said, but as a loving demand. Remember when Master before he was to come to America, he prayed to Babaji, and to make sure that he was in the right, he was not going to get lost in materialism in the West. And he wanted to make sure that he was doing the right thing. So he prayed and he prayed. And he says he prayed until he felt as if his skull would crack. Until the skull would crack. That is the effort that we have to put into our prayers. And if we want to know how to pray, we have to pray with that intensity. But it's an intensity as if we were a child praying to the Divine Mother, to our parent, to God. And in that spirit of devotional self-offering, we also can do our Kriya. It's a devotional self-offering of the little self up into the highest self. Master was, when he was in America, he met it was a priest, maybe, I don't know, I assume since he said priest, probably it was Catholic Church, I'm not sure. But he asked the man, when they were talking about his devotion, his experience of God, and the Master said, do you ever see lights, or do you ever have angelic beings? Perhaps you see them, or you have visits, or you have, some experience in this way inwardly. And he was speaking about some sort of phenomenal things, which generally we discourage people from pursuing the spiritual path simply for that. And the priest said, or maybe it was a monk, I'm not sure, said, no, I don't. When those things come, but I leave it in God's hands. When God sees it fit for me to experience those things, so it will be. Now that sounded like a very nice answer. But then Master said, no, that's not the case. You have it wrong. The reason you don't experience those things and see those things is because your devotion is lackluster. Something to keep in mind. Your devotion is lackluster. And so we have to put that energy that Master was implying when he was praying to Babaji. That's the effort we have to put into it. And in that effort, we find that God then comes to us, of course, if our spirit is right, if our attitude is right, if we have done it in a spirit of self-offering. Now, I'd like to back up from that, though, because there's a step I think that's important for us to understand in order to come to that level of devotion. And this applies into, you could say, the lessons that we need to learn in order to approach God with that sort of devotion and that fervor are also principles that apply in our daily life. And I think to make, you could say why this applies a little bit to why I appreciate this openness in India that I do experience and I see there, and why I feel very comfortable with that, because it helps me in this particular way, is I think we need to make God our daily companion. And we need to cultivate that relationship of companionship, of friendship with God. And instead of, you could say, we need to pray to God. Yes, I certainly would not say we shouldn't do that. But I think one step back from that is to have a conversation with that, to talk to God, and to have that conversation ongoing in your mind, talking to God. And some people don't do that. But all of us have a conversation in our mind. If you think about it, you go out during the day and you're working in the yard, or you're in the garden, or perhaps walking, just taking a day off. There's usually a conversation going on in your mind. Something is happening up there. You're commenting, oh, it's hot today, it's cold today. It's, I forgot this, I forgot that, and I got to do this, I got to do that. You're talking all the time. There's very few times during the day when your mind is still. Because we know this because we're meditators. We know what that's about. It's ongoing. Oh, but I asked the question, who are you talking to? And I think one of the very easiest ways for you to stimulate your devotion and develop a relationship with God is to think in terms of that conversation ongoing as you're talking to God. Develop that talking to God relationship. And in the development of that, you begin to have a lifelong constant companion with you every moment there. And some people think, well, I talk silly things. Well, if you had a good friend, don't you sometimes talk silly things with your friend? Don't you sometimes gripe and grouse with your friends? And don't you sometimes have negative comments with your friends? And we say, well, I don't want to say those things with God. I don't want to share them with God. And I would ask, why not? I want God only to see my best behavior. Well, if there is such a thing as God, don't you think he sees beyond that? Just make God your companion constantly. And isn't this the best way to develop a relationship, is to share your hopes, your fears, your ambitions, your frustrations, all of it. And you just share that with God. And sometimes we think, well, nobody's really listening. Well, maybe that's true. And I've told this to people who are basically very secularist, don't really, they don't really believe in God. Maybe I wouldn't say it quite that strongly because most people don't like to say that, but they certainly don't believe in what I'm saying. And I would say I don't ever argue. I just simply say to people, why don't you try it? Just try it. If you remember Frank Laubach in that Conversations with God, his famous book. It's, if you don't know it, check it out of the library, or I guess you go to Amazon now. And his conversation where he tried to practice this 24 hours a day. And the transformation that took place in his life to just live in that consciousness of having a companion. Because if you want to pray for something, and that's, you, in a sense, it's a special occasion for you. The rest of the day, you don't really have that relationship. But if it's important to you, just as a child to the parent, you're there all the time. And not just toys after a certain point will satisfy you. And you want to have that presence of that companion with you. So I would say start with this, of talking to God. Now that's a beginning point. That's not where we end it. That's a beginning point, because think about this. If you did have a very good friend and you did all the talking, you wouldn't have that friend very long, would you? Because you have friends like that, they just talk. You can't get a word in edgewise. And if you do get a word in edgewise, that person is on the tip of their chair waiting for you to stop so they can get back in there. Or, one of the most disrespectful things to say to another person, or how to treat another person, if you tell another person something very meaningful to you, it's very meaningful. Something happened to me. I had a very meaningful experience. And you tell them, and immediately they say, yes, wait till you hear what I did or what I said. To come back like that to a friend is greatly disrespectful. Don't do that. Because it shows what? You're not listening. You're not listening. And the ability to listen must be a counterpoint to our willingness to share everything with God, and then to listen openly and respectfully to what God has to say to us. And I think you could say the relationship with anybody, but let's say with God here, begins when we develop a willingness to let another person, or let God, if in this case, to let another person into our life. You know that? If you're willing, if you have, think of that, your friends, because your husband, your wife. I see Maitri looking at Mark. There you go, Mark. You look back. is to allow another person into your life. Now, I know all about that because, I'm a rather private fellow. But a relationship, if you want to make it a deepening that relationship, you have to be somewhat open a little bit to let another person in. And that means a conversation. And a conversation is a two-way thing. You share, but you listen. Now, listening is, and when we listen, of course, to God, isn't this what we're asking for most of the time when we pray to God? We pray for many things. Sometimes we pray for, and if in India, the mother prays that she'll find a good wife for her son, or something like that. Kirti knows all about this. Or this is, they're very common. That's a sort of a joke. That's somewhat of a joke, but because it's a stereotype, you might say, of the prayer for something outward, is what I'm saying. Or the Wall Street broker prays for the stock market, or whatever it might be. We're looking for outward things that, but really, we understand, I think, as devotees, that really we want something deeper than that. We don't want just the outward things. We want something inward. But probably, I think, the most common thing that we're asking for in life is we want to know what to do. What's the right thing to do? Isn't that so? What do I do now, God? Oh my God, I've got myself in pretty deep. Give me guidance. Or we're faced with a situation because the paths are always diverging. Could I go this way? Should I go that way? What should I have for breakfast this morning? Or the mundane and the serious. We're looking for guidance in life. And in order to attract that, we have to be open to be able to receive that guidance. And unfortunately, very few people are really totally open because we have biases. We want things to be a certain way. Isn't that so? Yeah. And this is one of the things that if you want to pray for something in return, the necessity is to put our lives in God's hands and ask and then be open to whatever it is that God gives to us. And if we have that openness, and if we're asking another person, if you ask somebody for advice, I've found in life, people come to me and they'll say, oh, can you give me some advice? And I've learned that usually it's not advice that they're looking for. They're looking for confirmation of something they want to do, and it may or may not be a good thing, but they're looking for confirmation or support for what they want to do already. And not too many people are really, really open for what real advice is, in terms, because that could be anything. And kind of part of our mind says, I want advice, but the back of our mind says, oh no, but not that. I don't want that. Oh, I reminded me of a joke. I got a joke. The Pope gets a telephone call and he says, hello, and it's God speaking to him. He says, Francis, in this case, Francis, I have some good news and I have some bad news for you today. And Francis says, Lord, I'm so happy you called me. What is it that you'd like to tell me? He says, and the Lord says, well, Francis, I've decided to unify all religions in this world. So there's just only one religion. And Francis says, That's wonderful. That's wonderful, Lord. I'm glad you've called me to tell me this. And what's the bad news? Well, the bad news, Francis, is I'm calling you from Delhi. Or you could substitute any world capital you want in that story. You see, we have expectations for God. I guess that's the point of that story. And we have expectations. In order to really be able to pray rightly and better, we need to put our lives in God's hands, and that God is going to guide us, and start with the conversation, and a conversation develops the relationship, and from that relationship, so we're then open to be able to receive. And then when you have that relationship, you're able to listen to what God says, just as in life, we have to develop that ability to listen to other people, put aside the prejudice, our preconceived notions, not interrupt, and allow that other person to speak. That's a great show of respect for another person. And if you want to develop that respect back and forth, you allow that to happen. But anyway, you develop that as well with God. And then you begin to see that development, that relationship begins to open up. And in that relationship, you can then ask for whatever it is that your heart needs. You need, not necessarily you desire, but that which you need. Or you could say, God, this is my need, but thy will be done, not my own. And this is of course what Christ said, thy will be, may this cup pass from me. See, and that story out of the Bible is one of the most inspirational to me, because we sometimes think on the spiritual path that I can have no preferences. To be a true devotee and to be non-attached, I have no preferences. And what is that Bible saying? That Christ had a preference, but it was a preference, not a desire, you see. He wanted to serve, and he left the final decision in God's hands, and he was going to accept happily whatever happens. Now, I sometimes I trivialize that, and I don't mean to be disrespectful by trivializing it, because that's such an important message in the Bible. But I sometimes ask, do you like chocolate ice cream or do you like vanilla ice cream? You're at the ice cream counter. I have a preference. I happen to like vanilla. But if the man is out of vanilla, I say, well, give me chocolate then. I don't really care, but I can have a preference. And I think if we approach in that way, I think God knows what we want and what we need, and he knows our idiosyncrasies, and we can ask in that manner. And if we approach God in that way, then God responds for what is going to be the best for us. And then if we are willing to accept what comes to us, and if we do this during our daily life, not just in a special time at a special place, but during life, God, guide me, guide my footsteps in what I do. Now, we've taken it to talking to God. We've now mentioned talking with God. We're making this a joint effort, like the old story. You've made this. The priest says to the farmer, "You've made this a very nice. God's made this a very nice farm for you." And the farmer says, "Well, you should have seen it when God had it all to himself." You see, he was participating with it. So we've come to that point where now we're companions. We're friends. We have a relationship. And then we go next to that story that Oliver Black tells, where Master asked him, he says, "Oliver, do you pray?" And Mr. Black said, "Well, yes, Master, I'd like to think I pray all the time." And Master said, "You pray to God. you need to learn to pray in God. Now, what does that mean? So consequently, we pray to God, then we're praying, I introduce this middle point, with God, in God. In other words, if we want our prayer to be truly answered, and if we want to ask the right prayer, you could say, we need to put ourselves in attunement with God, to be in God consciousness, let's say here in this case, to put ourselves in God consciousness and what might that be? Now we think, what does that mean? God's consciousness is infinite. How can I do that? Well, think of this. God is ever new joy, infinite peace. But there's gradations of that. So we put ourselves, let's take joy as an example. We put ourselves in a joyful state. We feel joy. Not happiness because our wishes have been fulfilled, but we put ourselves in an inner state of joy a little bit. And we're going to then, in that state, we direct our prayer to God. If it's a greater, deeper state, we direct our prayer to God. If it's even in a deeper state, we are in God, you see. We are an active instrument of divine will if we have given ourselves 100% to God. And there's no need even to ask, because we know what God wants for us. And we're completely open. But this is a gradation. We start from where we are right now. So consequently, if you put yourself in a state of peace, in a state of calmness, in a state of, go through the 8 aspects, state of joy, and in that state, you direct your prayer upward, then you'll find that you have opened yourself and you're with God. So this is what Master says, pray in God. Put yourself in that state to the degree that we are able to, and offer ourselves up to God in that state. This essentially, the sense of this word of offer, is a concept that I don't like to use the word should, but is more effective in our prayer, a sense of self-offering. And when we talk about Kriya, for the Kriya bonds here, the new Kriya bonds, it can be done, and I think it should be done, or it's done better, let's say, or do it to the degree you can as a prayer, as an expression of self-offering. See, because we think of prayer as I'm asking for something in return. But really, as we give, so shall we receive. And if we give joy, we receive joy. And so in the sense of in the practice of Kriya, if we practice our Kriya and we uplift our consciousness and we offer that up in through the Kriya practice itself, we offer it up, we find as we draw that life force down that the joy resounds as that life force comes down. So approach your prayer this way. Oops, I've gone over in my time, I'm going to come back to where I started. The one thing I started is, because these are concepts, and maybe some of them resonated with you, maybe not. But if something struck you, I would say, and you're thinking about it, just practice and be the explorer. Try it and see. Maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. I can attest in my own life that some of these things are true, but you won't know until you practice yourself. So make it an experiment. Make life a laboratory for the experiments of spiritual truth. So this is what I think Master appreciated about the American consciousness. They were willing to try anything. They were experimentalists, and he's so much like that. They didn't take anything at face value. So I mean, but of course you can go too far and be skeptical, and that you don't even try because you know it already. It's not true. Well, that's the attitude of the habitual doubter. Take it to the point of saying, I don't know if it's true or not, but I'm going to try it, and then see and test for yourself. But before you can do that, I come back to the point I made, which is a willingness to let God be a part of your life. Now, you may say, well, I let God be a part of my life every night when I meditate. That's not enough. It's really not enough. I let God be a part of my life when I do a prayer here, prayer there during the day. That's not enough. And I know our mind can't be kept still long enough to be able to make God a part of our life all day, but that's where we want to go. And it starts with a willingness to let God be with us and encourage that. Be open to that. And again, coming back to where I started, I think this is what the most thing I've enjoyed about how many years has it been now? 14 almost now, years in India, that the openness and the ability to take down those barriers, social barriers, are merely a reflection of those inner barriers inside my own consciousness, to allow God to be in my life. Just by the affirmation, I can go to the grocer and say, Hari Ram, Hari Ram, and he'll say it back to me. And yes, it's just it's probably mindless to some degree with people, just habitual, but it's not habitual to me, because to me this is what I like, and that openness to be able to tell people love God, and to be able to have an audience resonate with that. And I want to see that also happen in America. That's my prayer for America, is to have God not just 100% private and afraid to share it with other people appropriately, always appropriately, never exclusively, never sectarianly. But if we can't do that in name, at least we can do that in expression of joy, peace, calmness, all of those things. Sharing Guru's name, sharing Guru's message with other people, and being an instrument for that. And I think in this way, we're going to enter into a new age. I do believe that. And I do think that although there's difficulties at the moment, I think we're moving in the direction, and not sharing in a sectarian way, but sharing in a way that there's a reality. God's personal experience, as Babaji said, will be that in individual hearts and minds, will be that which ultimately unites all of us one with another, and to see one another as brothers and sisters in God. And that consciousness has been predicted, as Babaji did, to ultimately spread throughout all lands. And in that consciousness is really what I'm saying. With the words, I'm not sure how to express them, but that consciousness of unity, I hope to see spread more and more in the decades to come, in the centuries to come. So God bless all of you. And I'd like to, I don't know what the protocol is for the right next thing to do, but I know I'm going to be here for a while, because if there's questions and discussion that we can have, I'm happy to participate. So at this moment, I'm going to turn it back to you, Maitri and Mark, because how we go forward, I'm not quite sure.
Well, what we do now is we just invite everyone to open up their cameras, and if they want to ask a question of Jaya, we sort of let it be, completely open.
I like it.
Good. Okay. And you can either, people remember that we're on Facebook, so if you don't want to be on Facebook, you can put your question in the chat box, or you can directly ask a question. Just come on camera
Okay. Oh, there's even, I see I got one message in the chat box.
yeah, we'll get to that in just a second. Let's take, it looks like Kirti unmuted herself. You want to ask a question, Kirti?
From Omnibod,
Yeah.
you know, we have a people don't know this, Kirti, I don't, sorry to interrupt you. We have a center in Omnibod now, and this is probably, it's come up with really within the last year or so, although we've been going back and forth there for much longer than that. So this is wonderful. I see somebody from Omnibod participating. So Kirti.
Pranam Guruji. I have a question. Like you mentioned, that when we pray to God, especially for the outward desires that we have. I mean, the world itself is so enchanting. This world itself that has been created by God has so many things which are really enchanting and draws our attention. And we probably, in material terms or even in immaterial terms, we seek something or the other, and if it is not in our control to achieve it, we pray to God. So
Absolutely, yes.
So is it? But then there's one more point that you mentioned, that we need to surrender ourselves and let God decide what's good for us. So this conflict between desire and surrender, how can we, how can we balance that? Because
that's a very good question, and I would say it is much better to ask God for the things that you. Now, obviously, I said the things you need, but even the things you want, it's better to ask God for the things you want than to ignore God entirely. You see, and now, yes, you could say that, oh, I shouldn't be asking for these petty things or these personal desires and et cetera, et cetera. And yes, probably there are higher levels of this, but there's a direction. And the best thing to do is if you really, really have a desire for something, and you make sure this is a sattvic desire, not a tamastic desire. But if you have a real desire for something, and don't be ashamed to ask, don't be bashful, ask that. But this is where the but comes in. Always say, if it be thy will. You see, because sometimes the best prayers are the ones that are rejected. I mean, the best gifts to you are the ones that God rejects. You see, you may not remember, but years ago in America, there was a president by the name of Jimmy Carter. He was one of the presidents, but he was a good man. He was also a minister in his church, and he was said something to the effect of God answers all prayers, and God, he answers the good prayers and he answers the bad prayers. And he says yes, but sometimes he says yes, sometimes he says no, and sometimes he says, "You've got to be kidding me." and in other words, sometimes the answer is no. It's because it's for your best welfare. You see, your protection. Because God knows what you need. But you know what you want. God knows what you need. So if you ask, the important thing is you've established a relationship close enough, as like a child asking the parent. Ask the parent a loving demand to God. That's how Master put it. A loving demand that you're not that you're not going to give up. Now, Ramakrishna used to say, well, God will answer those prayers and give you toys and keep you quiet until finally the day will come you won't be satisfied with toys anymore. And he said, that's better because it's directional. But in time, as your understanding grows, as your connection grows, you'll see that you won't want toys anymore. But God knows. So end your prayer with, I'd really like this. I prefer this, and I'd really like this, Lord, but only if you think it's your will be done. If it's good for me, and you leave the final decision on that, because sometimes the best answer is to say no. That's not going to work for you. And there's so many stories which would take up too much time here to illustrate that. But I think you understand. Anyway. That's a good question, though. I like that. That's a good question because I think all of us feel. Don't be ashamed to approach God. See, that's the thing with everything. I can't let God know that I want, a new car or whatever it is, or to get into school, the right school, or, all of it.
Okay, well, we do have one question in the chat box from Alex in Minnesota. And he says, I just want to ask Jaya, as a devotee in Minnesota, I've been spending larger than life amounts of time in seclusion. And while studying and meditating, a lot of my visualizations or prayers are being spent on praying for Ananda, Texas. Thank you. Alex.
All the way from Minnesota.
To find a new location for residency. I think Jaya, that we are... we let go of our center, and we hope to reincarnate in the future. We didn't actually say our affirmation today, my fault, but we do have an affirmation that we're repeating. But anyway, he says, praying for Ananda, Texas to find a new location or residency for a temple, farm, living community. I just want to ask Jaya, does Kali Ma hear these prayers? It's cold here in the winter months. So when I get ahead of my finances, I want to spend all my time in satsang with fellow devotees. It would be nice for the community there to have a location and fellowship, somewhat like the village. Thanks. My internet is poor, so I thought text was better.
Well, that's a really, and some of the answer to that, of course, is the same that I'd say to Kirti, but obviously this is good to affirm. You see, there's which is worthy of a whole other class, is there's this line between affirmation, prayer demand, and requesting type prayer, you see. But one is to always, it's in God's hands, but we can ask as a loving child. And the next step, of course, is to put energy behind our requests, because sometimes, you see, this is the thing. You can go to temple, you can go to gurus, you can go to get blessings, but you can't be passive once the blessings have been given to you. See, those blessings have to be in action, and you have to actualize your ideals in life, or else you can't wait for, manna from heaven to just descend. We have to put that out, and then we have to take steps in that direction. And God hears all prayers. Divine Mother, it will support positive prayers, those things I say by positive, I mean those things that are going to take you in a direction that's in your welfare. We'll support those. We'll support those, but you have to take steps. You have to take something, and the steps maybe might just be mental at the beginning stages, or there might be just, forming satsang with other people. It might be like you said, maybe I think you meant reference here to raising money, saving money, getting ideas flowing. I think developing relationships with other people is a key ingredient in that, is to be able to, satsang is for spiritual benefit, yes, but coming together is, I think, one of the first steps that you need to take, all of you, if you're interested in what is being said here, Alex is saying, is you have to have that satsang. And satsang, we usually have, in the old days before this proliferation of online, we used to think about it in terms of physical satsang, but that's not possible. And I think Master God is saying, right now, you can't do that. But here we are. We're right here online. So this is what's the opportunity that's been given to us. So let's make use of it. And in that satsang, the generation of energy can then be accumulated to ultimately be directed in a direction. And if it's something good that you're trying to do, the challenge for every devotee is to put their ideals into practice. We are by nature, if you understand what I'm saying here, the kshatriyas. We're kshatriyas in the sense that we're here to act and put into, and I think those who are true disciples of Master, this line, yes, to be one with God in spirit is the highest duty, but most of us can't do that for 24 hours a day. We need to have something outward to do with our life, where to point, what to do. And the Kshatriya gives his life to service and action, high service, be a warrior, in other words, for something, a noble purpose. And I think we're in that point where we can express that in many ways. Now, you mentioned one way here, which I think is good and noble. And I think satsang, and then out of satsang comes friendship, very important. You have to be, friendship is not just because they're friends, but friends tend to be people who share common ideals, common purposes in life. And friends are people who are willing to sacrifice for one another, are loyal to one another, are supportive of one another. So you must develop friendships as well. And it's difficult in these days right now, of course, but that's what we have. So we have to face what we have. And then you need to friendships do things in common. And I think the things that we can do in common now, well, we can't perhaps go out to the local restaurant together these days, but we can get together to meditate. We can get together to share in the ways that we can share. So building that magnetism to, you say, because you mentioned an ideal that is more than just yourself, a desire for yourself. It's a larger component to it. You need to develop the magnetism for that and be able to help coalesce the energy that is necessary for that to happen. Energy is one of the things, that energy takes many different forms. So I think it's a very noble thing to do. It's a very good thing to do. It's not going to be everybody's interest, and so it's not an either or situation. But for those who are, I think, something that is purposefully serviceful. And in other words, why do something? You can't do something just for yourself because it's more pleasant only. I'm not saying, I have nothing against pleasantry. I mean, it's good to be pleasant, but there has to be a higher purpose to something in order for it to be dynamic and expansive, because expansion is magnetic. If you have an expansive purpose, can communicate that and demonstrate it in this material universe, then I think you're more likely to be successful. So I encourage you very much to do it. And, and it's really I'll tell you a story. When I came to this path, I met Swami Kriyananda in 1968. And I came because I was interested in yoga. I came because I was interested in meditation. I was interested because I read the autobiography of a yogi. Those were my primary interests. But he invited me to his apartment in San Francisco because he told me, I had asked him to learn Kriya Yoga, and he said, well, I need to get to know you a little better. And I said, well, how do I do that? He says, well, come for satsang. Come to my apartment and on Thursday night, Sundays, so on. And so I said, okay, I will. And so I went and I joined in, and satsang happened. Well, one of the topics of that satsang was the development of what has later became Ananda Village, Ananda Meditation Retreat. And it was in the formative states, but the village did not exist in those days. But he was talking about it, and he had read much, and he had written a manuscript about starting such a thing. So he gathered people together to talk about it. And I went to some of those meetings at his apartment, and there was about 20 people, let's say, there. And they were all of them. I was the youngest person there. I think I was 22. There may have been somebody younger, but not many, if any. And so, but most of the people were were older than I. So I didn't say anything because I was intimidated. I thought, well, these people seem to know what they're talking about, and I just listened, and I didn't have anything to contribute. But finally, after some number of meetings, Swami had bought this piece of property, and he said, I need somebody to go up there to, it's just bare land, really, and I need somebody to go up there to get something started so that we need to get some pit toilets made, very basics, pit toilets made. We need to make some camping sites. We need to, get water running, very basic. And he says, I need help to do somebody to help me. And he looked at me, he says, would you help me? And I thought, oh, well, I hadn't thought of anything like that. But he asked me directly, and I said, okay, I'll help. I'll go. And I did. And so I went there as I was expecting all these other people would come later. After all, they've been meeting for months. One person out of that group came. Nobody came. They talked. And that gave me a big lesson. Talk is good. You got to start there. But at some point, somebody has to put things into motion and action. And it's going to be some individual or some small group of individuals, and probably the latter, because usually in situations like this, it takes resources. And so consequently, there was a small group in Swami's case, because I wasn't the first one to go up there. There was others. There was a handful of others there. But it was out of that handful of people that ultimately this big thing came about. So it took some people to actually put ideas into motion. It took somebody to coalesce those ideas. That was Swami. To coalesce those ideas. Somebody. It took inspiration, but it actually took. It did take money too, but the people who were at those meetings, I always look back and I say, what happened? They did not change. They weren't ready to make a change in their life because they were very comfortable where they were. And I think that's what you're going to find in your efforts too. You're going to find, but nevertheless, those people that did remain back, they helped us. They helped from afar, but they never participated directly. So I think the same dynamic, I don't think that was unique. You're going to find people that will support, but there's going to be somebody that has to actually do something. And ideally, you've got a good idea and it's magnetic and attractive enough that other people will come in and join in. And then it has to be something that is serviceful and magnetic and expansive to be able to pull other people, because people will respond when they feel inspired. People will donate to something that inspires them, even if they never go there. They'll be, because something that is expansive and touches their idealism will attract. And so I leave those as suggestions.
Thank you, Jaya. I have a practical question and sort of an extension along those lines too. And I also want to make sure you're okay with staying on with us a little bit longer, especially since you talk longer.
Well, here's the thing. If you know me, you know once I get talking, I can't stop. So what you got to do is you got to start going like this, in the background, and then I'll stop. And I have absolutely nothing to do today except be right here, and it's morning for me, so I'm good.
Oh, thank you. Well, we know that you like to talk, but we also know you're a really good listener too. So you're that wonderful example for us. One thing I wanted to ask along the same lines of what Alex was asking. So in India, I know Swami's energy came in and he sort of helped coalesce that initially. But now, he's been gone for quite a while. And one of the concepts is, of course, willing channels. We need to develop those friendships in God together, but we also have to be willing channels. And I'm just wondering if you could share a little bit more about how the work has organically spread in India, how you were able to take that initial inspiration, some of the pitfalls and some of the great joys, and just working with people's energies there, and going, just expanding a little further on that willing channel concept, and a divine friendship in God is different from just our, out here in the world. We often, I wish I had all my friends were on this path. They're not. But yet I treasure them still, and so it's not that I don't love them or see God in them or anything. There's a difference between that divine friendship of the like-mindedness folks that are very dedicated to and feel that attunement to this lineage. That's how we work to be more receptive in our common goal to maybe share this work and to take our own lives collectively deeper, which is the importance of the satsang and spiritual living is community, as Master talked about. Now I've just thrown a lot at you, so go for it.
Well, yeah, you packed in a lot into that one simple question. But I think all of us have that same experience, that we have multiple friendships in different realms of our life, and I know we have our childhood friends that I'm still friends with people from college that I went to, but I don't see them too often anymore. But I'm still friends with them. They chose a different path in life. But yet again, my involvement with the Nanda is such that I've made a lot of more friends. But interestingly enough, I'm friends because of we share a common goal, a common willingness to serve, and probably if I had not been involved in this work, I probably would have never made friends with them because they're very different from me. I would not have naturally been attracted to people that I've subsequently made pretty good friendships with, because not because we were alike, but because we have common goals in life and we're sharing on that level. So I think that's a common thing for everybody who's experienced. And it doesn't, I don't have to make choices, although, because I love everybody and I love, according to each. But I realize that my day-to-day life is with those who are devotees because that's what I do and that's what they do. And so it naturally brings us into more closer attunement. In India, going to your first major question there, we have our mission statement in India, and this is the mission statement that Swami gave to us. He said, our mission is to share the name and teachings of our Guru, Paramahansa Yogananda, with as many people as we can in the land of his birth. And you could say we'll share it with everybody, even if they weren't, even beyond India. But really, it's to share his name and teachings with more and more people. Not necessarily to accomplish anything outwardly or to do this or do that, but just to make his name and teachings well known, better known. And so everything we do is somewhat predicated around that. Now, Master was known, and he came for more than simply Kriya Yoga. He came to show how God and these teachings that he shared applied in all aspects of life. So we reach out to people in schools through education. And Swami, of course, expanded on that with his writings. So we reach out to people in terms of education and business and family life. And so we're trying to just get Master's name out there and express that outwardly, and at the same time do it in avenues that have been given to us by both Master and Swami. So we've reached out And now every country has its own cultural context. And just as when you're giving, if any of you are meditation or yoga teachers, you know, if you go into a group of people, the first question you have to ask yourself is, who is my audience? Who is my audience? You can't be talking to high school boys in the same way that you'd be talking to elders in a old age home. You've got two different audiences entirely. You may be talking to government officials. You may be talking to you have to craft your message according to your audience. And what are their questions? Because you are there to serve their needs. You're not going there to serve your own needs. You know, I've got a mission, and this is how it is in my mind, and I'm going to implant it on people. That's not the right way to go about things. You have to be sensitive to what people need and want, but behind it all, you're trying to, draw them to Master's, the message. And that message was not sectarian. It was a universality is what we're trying to get people to understand. So you take the cultural context, and India has parameters in which you can work that are different than, let's say, we are now in America. The different situations, you have different realities that people must face. America is a rich country. India is not a rich country. And although India has a great spectrum of wealth, and you do find people that are very, very rich, but you have a big spectrum. You have India is a land of 16, 20 languages. And you have different realities of the majority of people live out in the countryside in villages, not in metros, in big cities. You have those contexts that you have to you'd have to recognize and respect, but everybody wants God. And this is why, again, I come back to this is why I like India. I like everybody, generally speaking. You have the atheists too, but you can even cross religions. You can speak about God, and so that is the common factor that you can speak on, and then tailor your message. And everybody, as Master said, is seeking happiness, or avoiding suffering. So you can speak to that. And so what we've done in India is our primary message is to try to get Master's teachings out, in his name and message out. And we've done that. Initially, we did that we made it an effort to set up a center, a physical presence in every major metro in India. And there's about 10 of them, 10 or 12 of them. We're not successful. There were a few that were missing. Ahmedabad was one of those ones we skipped initially, and then we came back now later to try to get a center started there. Poor Hyderabad, we've tried a number of times and have failed, or we have yet to succeed. But most of the metros, we do have a presence. And so that's been, you might say, it's a first step. But even there, the metros in India are huge. There are millions and millions and millions of people. Mumbai, the Delhi metro, 20 million people. So what's one little center going to do? But yet we reach people, and they can come, and we can plant a seed thought there. Now, since the virus thing has come, we have put most everything online, and so which is actually the good thing, is we can reach out way beyond what we could before, and so we're reaching out in that way as well. And I think you're in Dallas. Every time I used to come to Dallas, I used to pester you to do more public outreach. You know what I'm speaking about. And I was always somewhat amused that it never really went anywhere. But at least to the degree that I was envisioning or hoping. But now you have another opportunity. So I'm going to pester you again. Is you have an opportunity to reach out. This is what we do in every one of our centers. totally online, totally how to meditate, Raja Yoga, discipleship, Kriya Prep. It's all online, and we reach out through, we advertise mostly on Facebook, and we say come, and we have an online sangha in every one of our major metro cities. And those that are, or we're trying to do that in every one of our major metro cities. And people come, and we have satsangs, we have classes, those chakra classes like you're talking about, I think you said, those things, we have all of those online. And we have, and as I think you probably, and I would say you're probably doing this already. I'm speaking to the choir, I hope. But this is what every center is doing. And I hope you can do this more and more. Now, you start with Dallas, of course, but you have Texas, all of Texas, and then this pandemic is going to end someday. And you have now planted the seeds for you to do something physical. Because people, we want to get together physically. I want to get together with people physically. And I think people are craving that, to come together and do something. So I would be, in the back of my mind, if I was you, I would be planning for this great big retreat that we're going to have when this pandemic allows it sometime. Maybe it's 2022. I don't know when. But, and then get out there, and because I think people will want to come together as souls. And so you're planting seeds now to build a big database of online people. And I hope you capitalize on it and then actuate it with something that brings people together. And it's never going to be either or. Both are going to coexist going into the future. And out of that, I think, I know some of you have interest in starting something, a community of some sort, like Alex was asking. Well, sooner or later, somebody could do something out in, I don't know where, but I don't know the terrain well enough, but it could be done out there. And there could be a city center, there could be a country center, there could be lots of things. And I think you've got, Texas has 25, 30 million people. You've got potential to do a big work in Texas. And it's like my old friend Nard Agee used to always say, he said, Jaya, the only thing stopping us now is just a little bit of ambition. And and he and I were construction mates. Some project would come ahead of it into us. We didn't know what to do. So, and at the end, the same thing applies. The same thing applies to every metro. Is a fertile ground to build a sangha of people, and that's what you need. You need people. These things don't happen in isolation. And then from people, you make friends, and you build a sangha. So, have a vision that's expansive, and people will come to something that's expansive. Whether they ever do it or not, I don't know. But littleness does not attract anything.